And there we go, we're live. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Today, Randy and I are going to be talking about the top 5 swim bait mistakes that anglers make in the wintertime and in the pre-spawn. I know a lot of you guys have probably heard about swim bait fishing as a great way to catch big bass and also numbers of fish. And Randy and I want to really dial you in on what you need to be throwing, your retrieves, the areas you need to be fishing, everything you need to know about swim bait fishing, and a lot of the mistakes that anglers make that cause them to not catch as many fish on swim baits. So Randy, how's it going tonight?
Going good, Johnny. Man, I've just been fishing a lot the last couple of weeks here in Missouri here, and I'm so ready for summer, man. It is every day we've been out there. It's been so cold, in the 20s, low 30s, throwing swim baits a lot, throwing jerk baits a lot. So we've got a lot of on the water experience we can share with everybody right now regarding the swim baits.
For sure, and we're going to be covering shallow water applications for swim baits and the offshore applications. So we're going to give you guys a good mix and hopefully give you guys a lot to try over the next few weeks. And we got a bunch of guys on the stream. I'm glad everyone's finding their way over to the new live stream channel. Let's see who we got on here. We got William, Austin, we got John, Mike, PK, Nitro Man, Kevin, Mark, Brent, Daryl, Doug, all the regulars. Good to see everyone. Michael and Tommy. Great that everyone is able to join us. And if you're joining us from the podcast, welcome. And we're just going to kind of jump straight into it here, Randy. We don't like to beat around the bush too much. We just like to get right into the topic. And the first thing that we really want to talk about that's incredibly important with swim bait fishing is the profile of your swim baits, both the size as well as the shape. And that's one thing that a lot of guys get wrong when they're swim bait fishing is they're not throwing the right size swim bait or the right profile for the water clarity and the water conditions. And because a swim bait is such a natural looking bait, it imitates a small bait fish, and there's no extra vibration or extra movement that you get from like a blade or something like that, it's really important that your profile matches exactly what the bass are looking for. And I have a bunch of things that I focus on when I'm fishing offshore with swim baits, but I know that Randy has other things that he focuses on when he's fishing up shallows. So we're going to kind of cover both spectrums there and give you guys some good stuff to think about. But starting off here, Randy, do you just have some high-level guidelines on profiles? Maybe just take a 1 minute, just quick summary, just to kind of get us started here.
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on, like I said, it's the combination of a lot of different things. It's a combination of the lake you're fishing, the size of the bass in the lake in general, the water temperature, water visibility, and the average depth that the fish are using that time of year. Another thing that's really key, in my opinion, from what I found out all over the country, is when you're in the dead of winter, like we are right now, like right now, our water temperatures all across the country are about at their coldest point right now. Mm-hmm. It seems like to me that they want a smaller profile swim bait during those super cold times of the year. But as you progress more into the pre-spawn, when that water temperature starts rising up another 5 to 10 degrees, that's when the gizzard shad and the threadfin shad are the largest that they are all year long. They're mature, they're larger, and that's when you find those bigger profile swim baits work better, a little bit later, closer towards the pre-spawn.
For sure. That's exactly what I find offshore as well. And what I want to do here, guys, first is just start sharing my screen and show you some of the swim baits that I throw. And this is going to be focused on offshore fishing, so when you're fishing away from the bank. And then Randy will talk about some of his choices as well for when he's fishing up shallow. So basically, when I started fishing swim baits about maybe 8 or 9 years ago, the one I started with was the Kitech Swing Impact Fat Swim Bait. I was through it in all different sizes, and pretty much everyone has probably thrown a swim bait that looks like this, whether it's this one or it's a different brand that has a very similar swim bait with the ribbed body and this sort of shape. It's a very popular swim bait style. And I threw this bait for 4 or 5 years, and I had a lot of success on it. But basically what I found is that everyone and their brother, their uncle, their cousin was throwing this swim bait. And even to this day, so many guys are throwing this Kitech Swing Fat Impact swim bait that I find that I'm just not catching nearly as many fish on it as I was 4 or 5 years ago. And it still produces really good fish, but I just don't get the numbers and don't get the fish to commit to it nearly as well as I was, again, 4 or 5 years ago. So what I've kind of switched to is my standard swim bait that I throw is the Megabass Spark Shad. I picked these up basically like 2 or 3 years ago just to experiment with them from the tackle shop. They're about the same price as the Kitech, and honestly, the reason I went to this Swimbait is because it was just different from a Kitech. It kind of had similar action, but it just looked a little bit different in the water. And immediately, I would go out and get 5 to 10 extra bites when I would throw this Swimbait over the Kitech in the exact same areas. And in my head, the reason that's happening is because I'm fishing areas that a lot of other guys are throwing a 2.8 or a 3.3 inch Kitech in, and the fish are just accustomed to seeing it. Where this bait is a little bit different, has a little bit more subtle action, and it just gets bit. And I basically throw it in all 3 sizes. I throw it in the 3 inch, the 4 inch, and the 5 inch size. And really, I only throw it in 2 colors. The albino color when I'm in clear water, and then the hue color in dirtier water. So when I'm fishing like less than maybe 2.5 foot of visibility, I go to this bright white color. Above 2.5 foot of visibility, I go to this albino color. It's kind of more of like a subtle matte blue color. And with these swim baits, I find that they cover the kind of the entire range when those fish are somewhat active but not super active. I'm not throwing these swim baits when I'm trying to target really aggressive bass or when bass are feeding a really big shad. I use these swim baits, like for example right now, like Randy talked about, when those fish are really finicky. And my favorite of all of these baits is the 3 inch size. This 3 inch size is a really subtle action. It's similar to like a 2.8 Kitech or a 3.3 Kitech. And it just gets bit when water temperatures are below 50 degrees. I really find, honestly, with my swim bait fishing that I catch a lot more fish on the really small swim baits, like a 3 inch swim bait, or a really big swim bait, a 5 or 6 inch swim bait. And if I had to kind of talk about what percentage of time I throw each of the sizes, I would probably say that I throw the 3 inch spark shad 75% of the time. I throw the 5 inch spark shad about 15 to 20% of the time, and the 4 inch spark shad maybe 5% of the time. I don't throw the 4 inch size, the medium size, very often. It's either the 3 inch or the 5 inch size. Now, as those water temperatures warm up into the, let's say, 50, 55 degree range, I'll actually start throwing some bigger swim baits. And my 2 go-to bigger swim baits are the Megabass Mag Draft Freestyle. I just like this swim bait because it kind of has similar action to that spark shad, and it's a big swim bait. It's a 6 inch swim bait. You can throw it in that nice pearl color. This is kind of my go-to. But if I'm fishing a little bit clearer water, go to the white back shad. And I'll throw this swim bait when those fish are really aggressive on big gizzard shad. Another bait I'll throw is the True Bass Hollow Belly swim bait, 5.5 inch. Another great swim bait. This has a lot more side-to-side wobble with the tail, and when those fish are really aggressive and I'm fishing in dirtier water, I go to this Hollow Belly True Bass swim bait. And that's kind of the swim bait lineup I go with. I keep it pretty simple. When I want those really aggressive fish that are feeding on big shad, I go to a hollow body swim bait or that Mag Draft Freestyle. And when those fish are a little bit more finicky, water temperatures are below 50 degrees, I go to the Spark Shad. That has a smaller profile, a little bit smaller action. Really just go with that 3 inch size. Now, we'll get into hooks and weights and all this stuff because that's another topic we want to get into. But for now, Randy, I want to toss it back over to you and kind of get your opinion on what baits you throw.
Well, one of the things I definitely agree with you on, Johnny, is I don't throw a lot of those intermediate size swim baits. I'm either throwing the smaller 2.8, 3-point size or the 5 inch and larger. Now, as far as like a shallow water application, this time of year, actually from December up until probably the mid part of February, most all the time I'm throwing 3 inch swim bait, like the just like the 3 inch Megabass Spark Shad. I will use the Kitech 2.8 sometimes because sometimes there's something about that 2.8 Kitech they really like here in the Ozarks. But when you're talking about applications for shallow water on those smaller ones like that, I find that I catch a lot of jerkbait fish this time of year, like in that 5 to 10 foot range, which is shallow by winter standards. But if you have a day out there, like when the wind's not blowing at all, that type of stuff, that's when I can downsize to that 3 inch Spark Shad, and I can catch those same shallow fish that normally would commit to a jerkbait on the smaller swim bait. I have just not found in my fishing across the country much of a need for a swim bait size like that 4 inch size. I just, once in a while on an Alabama rig, I may use a 4 inch one as the main bait if I've got like some 2.8 or 3 inch sizes on the rest of it. but most of the time I'm staying with that 3-inch size, the 2.8 to 3-inch all the time. And that changes almost dramatically when that water temperature starts to get around 50 degrees, because once that water temperature gets around to 50 degrees, I go straight from the little finesse swim bait up to the bigger ones, like the 5-inch spark shad, the 6-inch mag draft, that type of stuff. I do use the Zoom Swimmer. It's the Zoom Swimmer, sort of like the original, paddle tail swim bait. It was sort of like the bass. You guys probably remember the bass tricks. That's what started it all. So the Zoom Swimmer is sort of like the bass tricks, and in certain situations in the pre-spawn, that's highly effective. So, but we'll get into a little bit later about specific situations about when to fish this and not. But I tell you guys, from my experience, from what I've seen in it, not to say that you shouldn't have a big variety of profiles and sizes of swim baits, but 90% of the time, I don't care if I'm fishing here at home in the Ozarks, or if I'm fishing in Florida, if I'm fishing in Tennessee, I'm either using a 3-inch or smaller swim bait, or a 5-inch or bigger swim bait for 90% of my applications.
That's, again, I've talked to guys all across the country, and I know you have too. That's just a common theme I see is big swim baits or little swim baits. That's what you got to go with. I think a lot of guys get caught up throwing a 4-inch swim bait and just, they'll catch fish. I've caught fish on a 3.5-inch to 4.5-inch swim bait, but just not nearly as many as those little swim baits. And honestly, I find too that a really big swim bait or a really small swim bait can actually outfish an Alabama rig in the winter a lot of times. That's something that a lot of guys like to throw is the Alabama rig, but sometimes those fishes get conditioned to guys throwing those big flashy Alabama rigs. And if you use some of the tips we're going to talk about later in this video about retrieve, boat positioning, things like that, I honestly find that I can outfish an Alabama rig in numbers 3-1 with a single swim bait. Now, the size of your Alabama rig fish might be bigger, but then if you get into that pre-spawn and throw one single big swim bait, I can actually outcatch the Alabama rig in size, but maybe not numbers. So I wouldn't just get caught up all the time, guys, in the winter of throwing the A-rig. I know it's addicting, but if you're struggling to get bit on it, going to a single swim bait a lot of times can cause or can kind of cure your Alabama rig woes. Have you found that to be true too, Randy?
Absolutely, because bass are like it's like any other lure category we talk about. Bass get conditioned to baits, and Johnny, you made a good point about the Kitech early on, about how effective it was right off the bat. I had a chance to use these Kitechs back when they very first started out. I can't remember how long ago, but it must have been like almost 10 or 12 years ago. I fished with one of the guys. I was fishing a tournament up at Lake Champlain, and I fished with one of the guys that worked for Kitech, and he had these new swim baits, and I'd never seen anything like them. And, they work so good right off the bat, but then they get conditioned to them just like anything else. And that's one of the big things I think we need to stress to a lot of people out there. And I don't want this to become like a Kitech commercial, but I'm saying Kitech is still a highly effective swim bait. It's probably the number one swim bait out there. But in my personality, when you're talking about profiles, they have become so conditioned to that rib and that action that's why you're seeing a lot of different swim baits profiles on the market opening up to be even more effective that were overlooked before. Because for most people, that's just their go-to deal. When they think of swim bait, they think of nothing but Kitech. And you can go into the tackle stores here anywhere in Missouri, Arkansas, and there's just shelves and shelves and shelves on them. And it's just like anything else. Bass will get conditioned to that. They get conditioned to the profile, the vibration it makes, the look it has, and you've always got to stay ahead of the curve on that.
For sure. And I throw that spark shad now, but I have a feeling maybe even in a few years, they might get less on that Kitech on certain situations. You might have to go back to it. But honestly, I just don't see a lot of guys throwing that spark shad just because I don't feel like it's easily available. That's the big thing. And that's why I really throw it, just because your average weekend fisherman isn't going to have access to it. You can order on Tackle Warehouse, but you can also order a lot of swim baits on Tackle Warehouse. So,
another thing that we've seen on that is there's been so many knockoffs of the Kitech profile and design. I mean, Bass Pro has a knockoff on it that looks exactly like it. I've used them too. They're good baits. I mean, I've caught fish on them. But like I said, that whole profile has just gotten, the market is oversaturated with that. And these bass aren't stupid. Bass, they didn't survive on this planet for millions of years by being dumb. They evolve and they get smart in a hurry with that.
For sure. Awesome. Well, let's jump over to the second mistake that we see anglers make. The first is they're using the wrong profile and the wrong size. The second mistake that I see a lot of swim bait fishermen make is they're using the wrong weight and the wrong head size on their swim baits. Now, Randy and I have completely opposite perspectives on this, so I'm going to start with the offshore swim bait head sizes because I actually have a recommendation that I'm going to make, but then Randy's going to give you the complete opposite. So make sure you pay attention closely to what we talk about because there's a key difference between offshore swimbait fishing and shallow water swimbait fishing. So in general, when I'm trying to do offshore swimbait fishing, which means I'm fishing away from the shore in maybe 10 to 100 feet apart, depending on what the fish are doing, my go-to swimbait again is going to be the Megabass Spark Shad. Well, I'm throwing this bait usually in the 3-inch size. That's my best size. And the issue with a 3-inch Spark Shad is that the bait is tiny. And so there's only a very small number of hooks that you can actually use in this bait that will give the bait action. If you use a hook that's too long, it will go too far into the tail and you'll completely ruin the action of the swim bait. So the key is finding a hook that only goes about halfway through the body of the swim bait and comes out right here. You want to leave at least a good maybe 2/5 of the tail where it can actually still swing side to side. And if you use too big of a hook, you're going to ruin the swim bait action and you won't catch nearly as many fish. So the head that I've found that works great is this 4x4 little head swim bait jig head. It's by 4x4 tackle. It's this small little swim bait head which has this amazing screw lock keeper. I can catch 10 to 15 fish on one Spark Shad before changing them out. The only way they basically get worn out is when they get ripped up so much that I can't keep them on the hook anymore. And the nice thing about this ball head is that the ball head actually gives really good action to that small swim bait. The water rolls around it really well and doesn't steal a lot of water from the actual swim bait tail. And the other thing that's nice about this specific jig head brand is that you can get it in a 1/4 ounce and a 3/8 ounce size, but it has a 2/0 hook, a 2/0 tiny little 2/0 hook. If you use a 3/0 or a 4/0 hook with that 3-inch Megabass Spark Shad, you're not going to be able to get enough action out of that bait. So I go to usually a 1/4 or a 3/8 ounce size when I'm fishing offshore. Now what I find is that when the water temperatures are below 50 degrees, the best weight for that swimbait head is a 1/4 ounce. The 1/4 ounce allows you to cast that bait, get it down to 20 or 30 feet, and then slowly reel that bait in and keep it down the strike zone. You can basically keep that bait down in 20 or 30 feet of water as long as you're just barely turning the reel handle. One thing you'll notice if you actually look at like a swimbait on live scope or something like that is that when you're reeling in a swimbait, and I'll kind of show you guys my retrieve, if you're reeling a swimbait at a steady pace, like let's just say you're reeling it like this fast, that bait will rise a foot or two every second, especially if you're using a 1/4 ounce head in 20-25 feet of water. So to avoid that, you're going to have to just, barely turn that handle just as slow as you possibly can to keep that bait level in the water and down in the strike zone. This makes it really difficult sometimes to even keep the bait down there, so that 1/4 ounce head is mandatory. And again, it's hard to find a 1/4 ounce head with that small of a hook. Now, when the water temperature gets above 50 degrees, I find that by slowly crawling that swim bait, those fish actually get too good of a look at that bait and they won't react to it very well. For whatever reason, in that cold water, they like that slow, just methodical retrieve, super slow, and that gets a lot of bites. But when their metabolism is higher in that 50 plus degree water, they won't touch this 1/4 ounce head nearly as well as a 3/8 ounce head. That 3/8 ounce head can get down to the bottom, and now you can actually employ a little bit faster retrieve. You can reel it at a decent pace and keep it down there in the water. And you can also stop the bait, and it will fall very quickly. And we'll talk about retrieve here in a second. The stopping and letting the bait fall and then burning it and stopping it, that's what triggers a lot of bites with swim baits. And when you're fishing offshore in water that's above 50 degrees, a heavier head allows that bait to move a lot more erratically. It drops faster, you can burn it and keep it down deeper better. All those things are really, really important. So I find that a lot of guys when they're fishing offshore swim baits don't throw a heavy enough jig head. 1/4 ounce is the lightest I'll go with that little tiny swim bait, and then a 3/8 ounce is what I throw when water temperatures are above 50 degrees. Now, the other jig heads I throw, for example, when I'm throwing the 5-inch Megabass Spark Shad, is I'm going to be throwing the Picasso Smart Mouth Plus jig head with the 3X Mustad hook. This is kind of a long name, but the reason I like this bait or this hook is it has a nice O'Shaughnessy bend to it, which is kind of nice there. It also has a pretty stout hook, and it has a great bait keeper. It has that kind of extra wire in there that holds the plastic on really well. And the other thing I like about this is I don't know what's going on with the sizes. Here we go. You can see this bait comes in every single head size, basically from an eighth of an ounce all the way to 2 ounces. And a lot of times when I'm fishing a swim bait in the winter, I'll be using either a 3/4 ounce or maybe a 1 ounce head. I kind of go with the 3/4 ounce if water temperatures are below 50 or 48 degrees. Right when they hit 50 degrees, I'll go to the quart or the 1 ounce. And then when the water temperatures get into the 70-degree range, I actually go to the 1.5 ounce jig head, which is a really heavy jig head, but it allows me to really reel that bait quickly and stop it and kill it while keeping it down in 15 to 20 feet of water. It's one of the few jig heads I found in the market that you can actually get that really heavy head, and the ability to reel that bait fast while keeping it in deep water triggers so many more bites for me. And I've actually thrown the 2 ounce head as well in certain situations, especially when I'm throwing that Megabass Mag Draft Freestyle. I can throw a 7/0 hook with that jig head, 2 ounce head, and it will keep that bait down there really well in 20 to 25 feet of water. And it seems like it's a really heavy deal to throw, but I'm telling you, you can hammer them on it. So my recommendation with offshore swim bait fishing is to go heavier on your head selection when you're trying to trigger bass offshore. One question I got on the stream was I was doing that live scope video you probably saw if you've watched the main Fish at the Moment YouTube channel. If you found your way here without knowing about the main Fish at the Moment channel, head over to just Fish at the Moment on YouTube. We make really good 30-minute instructional videos. They're highly edited. They're not just live streams or whatever. They're not live content. It's actually fully edited content of fish catches. And in that video, I was throwing the Mag Draft Freestyle, and I was throwing the 6-inch swim bait on an underspin. And I was throwing the Blade Runner Spin X underspin with a 1 ounce head. And I was fishing actually on a hot water lake. It was a hot water discharge lake. So water temperatures were 59 degrees, even though it was the middle of the winter. Water temps everywhere else around the lakes are 40 degrees. But because that water temperature was warmer, I was throwing that 1 ounce head with that big Mag Draft swim bait, and I was burning it and stopping it, burning it and stopping it. And that got so many big bites. I was catching a bunch of 4 and 6 pounders. I had more fish I didn't even show on camera, Randy, in that video. I had like 7 or 8 fish on camera, and I had like a bunch more 4 to 5 pounders I didn't even put on camera because I didn't need them. So crazy deal, but swim baits are just so effective offshore if you're using a heavy enough jig head. That's kind of what I'll recommend to you guys, especially as the water temperatures start to warm up here. Before they get warm, if you're throwing a big swim bait, 3/4 ounce jig head. If you're throwing a small little 3-inch swim bait, go to a 1/4 ounce jig head, and that's the way to go. So that's my take on head size and hook size. What are your thoughts there, Randy?
Man, mine's completely opposite here. You talked about the lightest you'd go would be a 1/4 ounce head on that 3-inch. I never use a 1/4 ounce head. That to me is like throwing a punch rig. That is so heavy to throw on a 3-inch bait. So in my application, I'm fishing a swim bait less than 10 feet deep most all the time. And I always fish it with the wind because one of the things that I figured out in jerkbait fishing, swim bait fishing, that you get a lot more bites fishing with the wind, not even at a 45 or against the wind, but with the wind. So I can get away with a lighter head. The head that I use 90% of the time on my 3-inch swim baits, the 3-inch Spark Shad, or if I'm using a 2/8 high-tech, whatever, is that Megabass 1/8 ounce Okashir jig head. That thing is the most awesome jig head I've ever seen. It's got a great keeper on it. It's the original fish head jig head. I mean, there's been a lot of duplications made, but Megabass made that Okashira head design that looks just like a fish. So what I like to do with my 3-inch sizes is I'll cut off just like maybe an 1/8 of an inch off the end of the swim bait. And I did a video on my YouTube channel showing about how I did this. Put it on there and stay with the 1/8 ounce all the time, 6-pound test line. And this allows me to really efficiently cover that 5 to 10 foot zone, regardless if the wind's calm or if it's blowing 20 miles an hour. Personally, in the wintertime, whether it be early, mid, or late winter, I like that slower fall and the slower presentation that the 1/8 ounce head gives me, because that's a pretty slow fall with either one of those swim baits on there. And most of the time, what I do, depending upon the condition, the mood of the fish, I'll cast it out there like into 2 to 3 feet of water, let it hit the bottom, and just begin a slow retreat back to the boat, trying to keep it close to the bottom. I don't like to fish it very high off the bottom in less than 10 feet of water. One of the big keys on those 3-inch swim baits, I don't care what head you're using, if you're using the Okashire or if you're using the one Jonny talked about or different sizes, is you got to take extra time and make sure you rig that thing perfectly straight. Because if you don't rig a little swim bait perfectly straight on that jig head, it's going to roll to one side. If you do anything to speed up the action, it's going to roll it to one side. So spend a lot of time with that. Now on the bigger ones, like I said, I don't use the 4-inch size very much, but in the pre-spawn, late winter pre-spawn, when that water temperature starts to hit 50, the two top techniques I found out is I take the 5-inch spark shad, sometimes even the 7-inch spark shad. I don't know if a lot of you guys know that, but Vega Bass also makes the 7-inch model. And I'll take just a big offset hook like the Beast hook, and I like to use a really light belly weight on it. And a lot of times the lightest you can find is like a 1/4 ounce. So what I'll do is I'll get one of those big belly weighted hooks, and I'll take the lead and I'll file it down towards only like a 1/16 of an ounce, where there's just a little bit of lead on that belly weight. And I'm casting this thing back in shallow water, like in the back of coves, the back of cuts, over real shallow bank grass, that type of stuff, where I can just sort of wallow that swim bait and keep it in sight when that water temperature is in the low 50s. This is the time of year you can catch giants on that. When you put a light belly weight on a big swim bait and you sort of hover it just below the surface, that's when I catch more 4 to 6 pounders with this technique in the early spring pre-spawn than I do any other way with my swim baits. And that's the same application that I can use with the 6-inch mag draft. The 6-inch mag draft, it's one of the big secret baits of the pros, if there's any secret deal. Chris Zaldain's made it famous. You've seen him throw it all over the Elite Series. That bait stays high in the water column extremely easy, even by reeling it slow if you keep your rod tip high. So for me, I'm like, I'm fishing for a different personality of bass than what Jonny is offshore. The bass that I'm fishing react completely to cadences and speed and that type of stuff. So overall, I'm going light. I mean, I'm not going much over an 1/8 of an ounce, even on my big stuff. So that's been really effective for me in Florida, Texas, Missouri, East Tennessee, anywhere I go. It's been working.
That's super interesting, because it's funny how fishing two different styles brings in two completely different sets of equipment, especially with swimbait fishing. And that's one thing you guys got to pay attention to when you're watching other YouTube channels, is that they're going to recommend baits potentially, but they're going to be recommending them based on how they fish and their styles of lakes, their styles of fishing. So the way that they recommend the tackle to you is going to be different potentially than what you need to be doing, because your fish are going to act differently and your water temperatures, all these situations will be different. So don't just go out there and just, pick up whatever bait someone tells you to throw and go throw it. You have to experiment yourself to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. We try to give you as much info as we can, as much context, but there's only so much we can do. So cool. Well, that was the second mistake. So first mistake was profile and size. Second mistake was the weight and the head size. Now we're getting into the juice, Randy. This is the stuff that I like talking about tackle, but you know I like talking about bass behavior, positioning, stuff like that more than anything else. So the third mistake that I see a lot of guys make when they're fishing one second here. So the third mistake I see guys make when they're fishing swim baits is that they're not fishing them for the right bass. What I mean by that is that they're either trying to fish them for bass that are on the bottom when they're should be fishing them for bass that are suspended, or vice versa. And really, what I find is that when I'm fishing offshore, I'm almost exclusively fishing for suspended bass with my swim baits, where Randy, he spends a lot of his time fishing for bass that are on the bottom with his swim baits when he's fishing in shallower water. So you have to make sure that you adjust the type of fish you're fishing for based on what type of swimbait fishing you're doing. So let me kind of explain with a graphic here, and hopefully this will all make sense. So I'll just pull up a nice little graphic. You guys know I love my graphics. So got this pulled up here, and basically what we have is we have a largemouth bass, we have some cover, and we have some bait fish. And I'm going to kind of explain a little bit, Randy, your shallow water stuff too with these graphics just while I have it, and then I'll also let you kind of go into it as well. But whenever I'm trying to fish for offshore fish and I'm trying to fish a swim bait, I'm usually targeting bass that are off the bottom and are feeding on bait fish. They're usually anywhere from 3 to maybe 10 feet off the bottom, but maybe not right on the surface. They're kind of in the middle of the water column. And these bass are usually really tricky to catch with your traditional baits like a jig or a crankbait or spinnerbait. But swim baits are a great tool for getting these fish to bite. And basically what I'm doing is I'm casting my swim bait down, I'm letting it sink down to a depth that's maybe 2 to 3 feet above the level of where I think the bass are. And I'm going to swim that swim bait right over the top of those fish. And whenever you can get a swim bait to come over the top of a bass's head in, let's say, 2 to 3 feet from that fish, you're almost always going to get those fish to bite if they're in a feeding mood. Now, one mistake I see a lot of guys make is that they'll actually fish their swim baits either too deep, below the fish. And if you fish your swim bait below a bass, usually that bass is not going to go eat it because bass feed upwards. Their eyes are kind of more on the top of their head, so they're going to be feeding up a lot of the time when they are feeding in the middle of the water column suspended. So you want a bait that's going to go above their head, or you want to make sure that bait is at least level with them in front of that fish's face. Now you may be wondering, what type of area should I be looking for? So let me kind of just give you a quick example. I'm actually going to pull up some sonar recordings here of some fish that I catch on swim bait, just to kind of give you a better understanding of what I'm looking for. So got a recording pulled up right here. Just give me 1 second while I get this going. So here is an example, if I transition my screen, right here, of some fish that are suspended off the bottom, 3 to 5 feet off the bottom. Some of them are maybe 10 to 15 feet off the bottom. And you can see these fish on the down imaging. I identify a lot of my swim bait fish with down imaging. And so what I'll do is see several fish suspended over the top of rocks or brush or whatever. And what I'll try to do is cast my swim bait out, count it down to about 10 feet or to about 2 to 3 feet above where I see most of the fish. So in this example, I see a lot of the fish in that 10 to maybe 15 foot range. So I'm going to try to count down my swim bait to about 10 feet. And I do this by counting, or I basically do this by dropping my swim bait in the water before I cast it, seeing how long it takes for the bait to fall 2 or 3 feet. And then if it falls, let's say, a foot a second, I'm going to count the bait down 10 seconds. And then I'm going to just start reeling it in. And I'm going to try to reel that bait straight over the top of those fish. Now, if you see fish in your graph, usually they'll be hanging out there for at least a little bit. And so it may take you a couple casts to determine how fast you need to reel that bait to keep that bait right at that 10 or 15 foot mark. But if you get it right, those fish are going to hammer it. Here's another example of another spot where I found some fish suspended over the top of a big boulder. And in this case, I actually just cast a swim bait in, let it sink for maybe 5 or 6 seconds just to get down 4 or 5 feet, and then reeled it right over the top of those fish's heads. They came up out of 10 foot of water and crushed it. So this is how I catch a lot of fish. Now, I did see a question, what about 70-foot suspended bass on Table Rock? Well, on Table Rock, a lot of those fish are actually going to suspend in trees and standing timber, kind of like what you'll see here in this brush pile, except for just imagine this is 70 feet of water. The same thing applies. I'm basically just going to, let's assume that this tree is in 70 feet of water. I'm going to look for the bass with my down imaging, find them on the graph, count my bait down to 70 feet, and then reel it through them. Now, in that situation, a lot of times it's actually easier to catch those fish fishing vertically with a jigging spoon or with like an ice fishing jig, just because getting a bait down to 70 feet and keeping it down there is really, really hard unless you throw a really heavy jig head. So I prefer to get vertical on those fish when they're super, super deep. I usually prefer to throw a swim bait when those fish are in less than 30 feet of water suspended. But this is the type of stuff I'm looking for when I'm fishing a swim bait. And a lot of guys are not fishing a swim bait in these conditions. They might try to throw a swim bait when the bass are positioned on the bottom, or when they're maybe not seeing this exact image on the screen. And this is something I see a lot happening. Guys try to go fish swim baits when the bass are literally on the bottom of the lake. And they might try to grind that swim bait on the rocks or whatever. And that works with some fisheries, maybe on the Tennessee River with ledge fishing. You can catch fish on a scrounger head and a hollow body swim bait, fishing it on the bottom. But usually you can catch those same fish with a football jig, a Carolina rig, a deep diving crankbait. So for me, I'll choose those baits over a swim bait most of the time. The only reason those guys are really throwing swim baits on those Tennessee River areas is because those fish are so conditioned to every other bait that gets thrown at them that the swim bait just gives them something different to throw at those fish, and that's why they're doing it. But when I'm fishing on my lakes where the fish aren't heavily pressured, I can throw a crankbait for the fish that are on the bottom, but when those fish are suspended, that's when the swim bait becomes the ultimate tool. So again, let that bait sink down, work it through those fish above and the top of their heads, and you're going to get a ton of fish on the swim bait. Now again, you might have to go to a bigger swim bait with different head sizes and things like that, and you also have to figure out the fall rate of that bait to keep it in the strike zone. But once you get it dialed in, which might take a few fishing trips, maybe even a lot of fishing trips, it is an absolutely deadly technique, and I have caught literally hundreds and hundreds of bass doing this, Randy, over the years, maybe even 1,000 bass on swim baits. It took me a long time to really get it dialed in and figured out, but once I got it dialed in and I was able to target those suspended fish, it was lights out. And now they have the live scope, it's even easier because now you can actually see the fish moving in real time, actually watch your swim bait. So it's made fishing that way so much easier. But I've been doing it without the live scope for 6-7 years now, no problem.
Yeah, it's sort of the deal on the way that I fish them. I'm fishing, like I said, for a completely different personality of bass. It's almost like it's a completely different species of bass because the bass that I'm targeting in the wintertime around and anywhere I go when I'm fishing shallow, they're lone, isolated, rogue bass for the most part. Johnny's fishing for school fish. He's fishing for groups of bass that are, setting up on offshore structure. But mine are just individual rogue fish. Once in a while, I might catch two fish off the same point. But for the most part, it's one here and one there. So when you approach it from that manner, the way that you have to look at it's different. I know right off the bat, if you guys had come in the boat with me right now, if we go down to Table Rock Lake tomorrow, Bull Shoals or whatever around here, we'd be the only ones on the bank. Nobody is fishing the bank around here since Live Scope came up. Literally, everybody's off the bank. So I've got all the bank to myself right now, still catching a lot of fish off the bank. So what I'm looking for with that is I'm not necessarily focused on the bass being set up in one different depth zone because some days, depending upon the wind or lack of wind, depending upon the light penetration in the water, depending upon the angle, maybe if I'm fishing secondary or main lake points, the slope of that bank, there's a lot of different ways these bass are going to position and they're going to react differently to the swim bait because some days they want a swim bait, some days they want a jerk bait, some days they want a crank bait in that water depth that's less than 10 feet deep.
Hey, Randy, while we're talking about this, would you mind pulling up Google Earth just to kind of show us some of those banks that you're fishing? Because I think that would help kind of give these guys an idea of what you're thinking about. And while you're pulling that up, I'm actually going to just mention a couple things really quick. I notice we're almost halfway through the stream. So while Randy's getting that pulled up, a couple of things I want to call out. First, over here on fishthemoment.com, if you guys head over to our website, fishthemoment.com, you'll find a bunch of different cool things you can check out. First, we have an upcoming virtual seminar that I'm going to be doing next week on seasonal bass movement on man-made lakes with shad. It's kind of a specific seminar, but if you have man-made lakes with shad, I'm going to explain how you can follow bass throughout the lake in any season of the year, from summer, spring, fall, doesn't matter, and talk about how weather conditions, high water, low water, water temperature, all those things affect bass movement and shad movement to help you find way more fish. And I've been conducting these theories, trying to come up with it on my own for a long time, and I finally perfected it. I actually explained it to Randy the other day, and I know you were pretty impressed with it, Randy. You said you'd never heard anyone explain it like that. So I'm excited to finally kind of share my whole theory with you guys. I'm going to put like 30 or 40 hours into this presentation, into the seminar, so definitely check out the Seasonal Bass Movement Seminar if you haven't signed up already. We have a few spots left. And then we're also going to be doing a pre-spawn tournament pattern seminar with me and Randy, talking about the best patterns to fish in the pre-spawn if you're a tournament angler. These are patterns that produce big fish all throughout the pre-spawn, and if you're fishing tournaments anywhere from February or March, this is the seminar for you. It's going to be focused on man-made lakes, and it's definitely one to check out. And then we also have some upcoming lake breakdowns that we have available. We actually just add a ton of these spring lake breakdowns, so you can check out all these lakes. We're adding more lakes every single week. You get 40 GPS waypoints you can transfer straight onto your fish finder. We give you instructions on how to do it, so it's super simple. And if you don't want to check out those, you can also get a personal lake breakdown with Randy, and he can break down any lake in the country with those 40 waypoints if you haven't got the waypoints here. And then finally, if you guys are wanting to book a lesson with Randy and have him show you how to catch fish on Swimbaits, you can always do an on-the-water lesson with Randy here on the website, so check that out. So just appreciate all that. And if you guys really like the content, we'd appreciate it if you head over to the Support Fish the Moment page. Check us out on Patreon, where you can do a small monthly donation to kind of help us create content and continue doing what we're doing. And also use our Tackle Warehouse link. We get a small percentage of the profit every time you use this link. And if you shop Tackle Warehouse, just click the link, go here, check out, and we get supported, and you buy tackle. So that's pretty much it. Wanted to get all that out of the way as quick as I could. So Randy, I'm gonna throw it back to you and have you pull up Google Earth and get on with it.
Okay, let me give you guys a prime example of the stuff I'm fishing right here. This is actually a point right here.
And could you share your screen there, Randy? I'm not quite seeing it.
Sorry, yeah. Yeah, can you see it now, Johnny?
Yep, I got you. There we go.
Okay, I'll give you guys an example of the difference between like the way that I'm fishing right now versus the way that Johnny's fishing. This is a point on Table Rock here where I actually have been catching some fish off of the last couple of weeks. Now, this particular point right here, this is a pea gravel type flat point. It's got a long taper out that gradually drops off on both sides. So you may have 30 to 40 foot of water here, just a slow taper off over there. Every one of these points, if you're fishing a man-made reservoir that has water visibility of like over 2.5 or 3 feet, every single secondary main lake point is going to have two groups of fish on these points. You're going to have a group of fish that are in this 5 to 10 foot zone that are living on the bottom there. Then you're going to have a group of fish that are out deeper off the ends and the sides of these points that are suspended, like what Johnny's talking about. I'm not fishing for these fish out here. These are the live scoper guys out here. I'm on the bank right here fishing. So on this particular thing, this is all about my 3-inch spark shad, 6-pound test line, 1/8 ounce Okashira jig head, regardless of the situation. You will find when it comes to swim bait fishing in the wintertime that the bass will position totally according to the wind direction unless it's completely calm. Say, for example, if the wind's coming in this direction, towards the bank, this is going to be the sweet spot here. If the wind's coming straight in like that, you're going to have a sweet spot here. If it's coming in like this, the bass are going to be over here. And that's just the rest of the point for me anyway is pretty much dead. If I have like a 10-mile-an-hour wind hitting the point right here, I'm going to catch my fish right here, 5 to 10 feet of water, and I'm going to go around this point here and probably not get another bite. Now, if it's calm out, it's completely different. Those fish will scatter and they'll use every part of the point there. But like I said, what I'm targeting here are these fish that are coming up off the bottom. These are actually fish that are probably feeding on crawdads, and they're just opportunistic. I'm throwing that swim bait out there, crawling it just a few inches off the bottom, and they're hitting it just like they would a crankbait or a jig or some type of a bottom bouncing lure. Once in a while, if I get out and say into that 10 to 15 foot zone a little bit deeper, you may have an occasional little small wolf pack that are suspended like 5 or 10 feet down, over that 10 to 15 foot of water. That's a possibility. So anyway, like I said, this is what I'm looking for. Nobody around this part of the country where I'm fishing, nobody's fishing these fish right here. Everybody's out here. They're graphing in the middle of these guts out here, way out off the point ends. So, there's more than one way to catch them with that. But for me, the thing that I found out more than anything else, it's not necessarily about the point slope or the rock, the mixture of rock on it. It's just about having that secondary or main point that's leading into some type of a creek channel where you got, maybe some coves. These fish are just staging, getting ready to move back into these creeks to spawn in another couple months. Oops.
Oh,
Couldn't
cool.
hear you.
I got you. I got you. Sorry, I was muted, so I was typing. I wouldn't be messing it up. So this is an example here, guys, on Navionics. I just pulled up a Navionics map here, Randy, of a very similar area. It may be the exact point. I'm not sure. And this is the
Yeah, I
type of
can't see
point. Yeah, no worries. But yeah, Randy is talking about a point that looks like this. It's a gradual sloping point. You can see the contour lines are pretty spread apart, and then they tighten up a little bit as you get off the point. And this is kind of surprising, I think, to a lot of guys. And it was surprising to me, Randy, when you explained what points you fished up shallow, because a lot of guys are going to think about fishing these sharp drop-off banks, these channel swing banks where you have the water going from shallow water to deeper water very quickly. This would be like a bluff wall, a 45-degree rocky bank. Not as many guys are going to be going onto these flat points, but this is what Randy's targeting, both with jerkbaits and with swim baits. And a lot of the fish that I catch are actually, like Randy was talking about, in the middle of these guts, or maybe way off the tip of these points out here. And I'm looking in 20 or 30 feet of water on a brush pile or a rock pile. But there's another group of fish that live super shallow. And basically what Randy is doing is he is targeting the fish that are on the bottom. So the fish that I'm focused on, again, are way out here suspended. Randy's targeting fish on the bottom, reeling that swim bait almost like a crankbait down on the bottom of the lake, and then sometimes fishing it just a few feet off the bottom. Completely different way of fishing a swim bait, and that's why he goes to the lighter heads, because if you fish too heavy of a head, he's just going to get hung up on the bottom all day long. But for me, I'm fishing so much deeper, I need the heavier head to trigger those bites. So does that kind of wrap it up pretty well, Randy?
Yeah, it's like I said, there's a lot of times that, when you're talking about swim bait fishing in and around secondary points, and this is the primary winter setup for most man-made lakes. I'm going to guess that at least half of the key winter areas center around secondary or main points.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get too locked up on the rock composition or the angle of the point. Bass will relate to a lot of different type of points under a variety of conditions. To me, it's more about how the wind's hitting that point, and what the adjacent setup of that point is in relationship to like a creek or the main lake in there.
For sure. I think a lot of guys don't realize how shallow the fish will get in the wintertime. One thing that you were talking about earlier, Randy, that I wanted to bring back up and I had forgot, is you were talking about with your swim bait fishing that you will go to a shallow stretch of water and catch them in 50-degree water on a swim bait up super shallow. So I pulled up Google Earth here, and basically here's an example of an area I've caught them on like that on Lake Washita. If you take a look right here, you can see there's a little bit of a color change where it goes from darker to lighter. This is actually a grass line. Now I've caught fish on Lake Washita in 50-degree water temperatures when it's raining and sleeting and ice coming down on a lipless crankbait as well as on a swim bait up in 2 or 3 feet of water out of shallow grass in the middle of the winter time. If you have grass in your lake, those fish will get really shallow and you can catch them up in pretty cold water temperature, very, very shallow throughout the entire winter. You can also do this on rocky banks as well. It doesn't need to necessarily just be grassy lakes. And a lot of times I find that if you can fish really shallow in the winter with a lipless crankbait, a swim bait, stuff like that, you have a lot better chance of catching a big fish versus the guys fishing offshore. When I fish offshore, I catch a lot of numbers when those fish are schooled up, and it's really the only time I catch big fish is if I find like a brush pile deal or something like that. But if I want to win tournaments, especially in like central Arkansas where I grew up, unless you find a brush pile deal or some fish in standing timber like randomly, the best way to catch them is throwing a lipless crankbait down the bank all day long and hoping to get 5 bites, even when the water temperature is 48 degrees. And you're grinding that lipless crankbait in 2 foot of water all day and catching them off the same banks we showed earlier there on Table Rock.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, got a couple more things to go through here, guys. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the retrieve. The fourth most common mistake that anglers make when fishing a swim bait is that they don't vary up their retrieve enough when they're fishing a swim bait. Now, I know that Randy and I, again, have different opinions on this, so we're going to explain it because it's different for offshore fishermen versus shallow water fishermen. But what I find with a swim bait in general is that you're going to have a lot of bass that are going to be following your swim bait around. And because the swim bait is a sight-oriented bait, a lot of times what you'll have happen is that you'll start reeling your swim bait through the middle of the water column like I have here on the screen, and then after a second, the bass will get keyed in on it and they will follow it all the way back to the boat. And actually, you can see this in my most recent video with the live scope. A lot of fish were actually following my swim bait and not committing to it. And it was frustrating actually because you would see a 5-pounder following right behind your swim bait and they would never bite it. And you can see this a lot when guys throw those big giant glide baits offshore. They'll get followers. There are 6 or 7 pound fish that just follow the swim bait but never commit. And what happens is that the bass are inspecting that bait and they're just not quite sure whether they should bite it or not. And the way that you can kind of get these fish to actually commit a lot of times is by varying up your retrieve. And what I basically do is I will reel that swim bait at a steady pace for maybe 7 or 8 cranks, and I'll just stop it. And I'll just straight up stop it, let that bait fall, free fall 5 or 6 feet, and then I will start reeling it again at a really quick pace. So I'm trying to do all the spinning stuff, but I'll burn it 5 or 6 times really fast to bring it back up to the same water level, then continue that slow retrieve. So I'm slow retrieve, let it drop 5 or 6 feet, burn it 5 or 6 cranks, then continue that retrieve. What this basically simulates is a bait fish trying to flee that bass. It drops down and then comes back up. And if that bass is following the bait, a lot of times the second you drop that swim bait, they'll eat it, or when you burn it and then slow it down again, they'll eat it at that point. So you have to experiment with that retrieve. And some days I might find that I'm going to do a steady retrieve, then I burn it for 5 cranks or 3 cranks, and then let it fall after that, and that's when they bite it. Or sometimes you have to experiment with letting it fall all the way to the bottom and then reeling it up. There's just a lot of different things you have to do sometimes to get those followers to commit. But that was the reason I talked about earlier, the importance of having a heavy head on your swim baits. I talked about with the swim bait heads that I was showing earlier. If we go over to some of these swim bait heads like the Picasso one I was talking about, I'm sometimes using 1.5 ounces or a 2-ounce jig head with my swim baits. The reason I'm using such a heavy swim bait head is because the more you burn that swim bait, the more it tends to rise up and it's not going to stay in the strike zone long enough. Therefore, you have to have a heavy head that when you burn the swim bait, it keeps it deep. And also, when you stop the swim bait, it'll fall faster and it will trigger more bites. So the retrieve, changing your cadence, changing it up is critical to getting bit with a swim bait, offshore especially. And if you're just casting your swim baits out and just reeling them in at a steady pace, you are leaving 5 to 6 fish in the lake every single time you throw a swim bait, especially if you're catching them. If you're catching them on a straight retrieve, you're going to catch 7 or 8 more fish if you burn it, stop it, and change up that retrieve. It takes some mental, it takes you being a little bit more mentally engaged in your cast to do it, because you have to intentionally change your retrieve, change the speed, a little bit different every cast. You also have to pay attention to what the bass or what you were doing when a bass struck. So you want to make sure you remember that's how I was retrieving it when you get a bite. But if you do it the right way, you're going to catch him for sure. So Randy, what are your thoughts on the retrieve?
Yeah, that's a good point. And here again, I think it's important to reiterate, guys, that there's the mentality of the bass that Johnny's fishing for versus what I'm fishing for are completely different. I think a lot of the times when Johnny's fishing deep water with that swim bait, since you have a lot more water column to work with, and you're dealing with schools of bass, that different varying the retrieve and putting different actions and cadences on it is more important to generate that strike out of the sense of competition for those deeper fish. You don't really have to do that in shallow water here. Basically, I have 2 different retrieves I use. And I'm going to share with you guys another one of the secrets that I'm giving up, like this super great secrets that take me so many years to learn here every live broadcast. But I'm going to throw one out here for you guys. And this is going to be something that's going to work for you in early winter. We're pretty much past it now, but remember it, keep bookmark it for next year. One of the most deadly techniques that you can use with a swim bait shallow in the early winter, when that water temperature is still sort of maybe in that low 50s, that 50 to 55 degree range. If you've got water visibility that's over 3 feet, and if you've got a lake that has a mix of spots and largemouth, it can have smallmouth, but specifically lakes that have a lot of largemouth spot mix, like Lake Lanier in Georgia, some of the Ozarks lakes, some of the East Tennessee lakes, you got that combination of spots, largemouth, water visibility over 3 feet, and a lot of secondary and main points. One of the most deadly retrieves that you can use on a swim bait is burning it hard across the surface. I found this out because we like to burn spinner baits here in Missouri a lot of times. And I was at Stockton Lake fishing about 5 or 6 years ago, and I'd been catching them burning the spinnerbait, and it sort of died off. The wind died off a little bit, and I wasn't catching them. I picked up a 3/8 Kitech on, again, I had an 8 ounce head on it, and I was throwing it out there like in 2 to 3 foot of water on these secondary points. And I was burning that Kitech just about an inch under the surface, almost waking it. And I absolutely wrecked them that date on it. So I've used this all over. I've used it all over the Ozark Lakes. I've used it at Lake Cherokee in Tennessee. I've used it at Lanier. I've used it at Hartwell. Anytime you have these lakes like that, try burning that swim bait in the early winter up until that water temperature drops below 50 degrees. Now, once it drops below 50, like we're in right now, this part of the country, again, I'm not pulling these fish up on the swim bait. I'm trying to get them where they're coming up out of the rocks. They're not coming up on the bait. They're actually coming more of a horizontal type of a strike on it. So basically, my retrieve is the same all the time. It's a slow, medium retrieve. I try to basically adjust my retrieve to the angle of the bank. I mean, I'll speed it up if the bank's flatter. If the bank has a pretty sharp angle on it, I'll slow it down, or I may even take my bail and open my bail up and let it fall down a little bit. But it's just that slow, medium, actually more slow than medium retrieve, trying to keep it close to the bottom anytime that water temperature is, in that 40 to 50 degree range. I have experimented with different retrieves, like twitching it and pulling it and stop and go and that type of stuff. But for me, the biggest thing is just try to visually keep that bait like, within 12 inches off the bottom. However, you have to adjust the speed of your retrieve to do that. That's what you have to do. But anyway, try burning the swim bait, I've even used the 3-inch spark shad, any type of small swim bait. You got to go with a light head, because if you use a heavier head, it simply sinks too quick. So you got to use that light 8 ounce head, or even a 16th on it. Sometimes it makes it even easier. Give it a try next winter, and then let us know how it goes. So, and don't tell anyone that's not on this live broadcast about that. Try to keep that between us.
That's awesome. It's so crazy though, Randy. We're just thinking about the way that we swim bait fish, the retrieve, the type of fish we fish for, like the fact that you're wanting to keep that bait within 12 inches of the bottom, where my swim bait never comes within 5 feet of the bottom when I'm fishing offshore. And the retrieve, the weight of the heads, I throw heavy heads, you throw lighter heads, the profiles are different, all these different things. And it's just because swim baits are such a versatile bait. You have a bait that is basically a shad looking bait. So you have to be a little bit more creative with the swim bait, I feel like, to generate bites both shallow and offshore than you will with a spinnerbait or a crankbait, which is kind of more one-dimensional. A swim bait is one of the most versatile baits out there, and honestly, that's why I throw really 3 styles of baits nowadays, Randy. I throw a swim bait, I throw a jig, and I throw a crankbait. That's really all I throw anymore, ever. And it generates the biggest fish for me and the most fish for me. And if you can learn how to be effective with a swim bait, especially offshore for those suspended fish, that is the way to go. So I do want to talk a little bit about the last mistake that guys make. Before we do that, I just want to remind you guys that we are going to be doing some upcoming seminars on fishthemoment.com. So just head over to fishthemoment.com, head to the virtual seminars page. And if you're wanting to catch suspended bass with a swim bait on shad, this seasonal bass movement seminar that's focused on man-made lakes with shad, this is the seminar for you. It will help you figure out where the bait fish are going to be, and if you fish offshore, fish up shallow, doesn't really matter. It will help you find and track fish around your lake year-round. And I just kind of wanted, remember when I was explaining this whole shad movement and everything to you, Randy, with the graphics and everything? I know you said you never heard anyone kind of explain it that way. Can you kind of elaborate on that for the guys on the stream?
Well, I just, that's the whole thing about it. One of the things that Jonny does, if you guys can go back and look at that, is in order to understand how to catch bass, you first have to understand how their prey moves and operates. And, just seeing how Jonny explained that as far as the movement of the shad, the depth that they use, how they relate to structure, how they relate to, bass and their presence. I mean, that just opened my eyes tremendously to, how bass feed on shad. And, some of the the best things that we're learning right now is you're learning with a live scope, how those shad move out in open water, not relating to any structure at all. When you're explaining to, what pushes shad into a certain area, it's all about the food for the shad too. I mean, shad are feeding just like bass are feeding on shad. So their whole focus is where their plankton and the algae's at. So, as we get more of an understanding of what the prey does and how the prey moves within their natural world, it also helps us, to understand more about bass.
And that's what that whole seminar is going to be about, guys, is understanding shad, what makes them tick, how the bass follow the shad, where you can expect to find them in every single season of the year. And it's literally just science. It's not like I'm just making stuff up. It's just the way it works. And I've learned this just through years and years of spending time driving around with my electronics offshore and fishing offshore. When you spend, I actually checked this the other day, Randy. I put 900 hours on my engine just graphing around over the last 10 years. So I have 900 hours on my engine. And that's how I was able to kind of determine a lot of this stuff along with fishing. So if you guys are interested in learning about shad movement, seasonal bass movement, this is going to be by far the best seminar I ever give right here. So definitely sign up. There's a few spots left. We already have almost filled it up. I opened up a few more spots even to kind of let people in, but definitely check out that seminar. So that's that. Don't want to dwell on the shameless plugs too long, but last thing we want to talk about is a factor about offshore swimbait fishing and shallow water swimbait fishing that's completely overlooked, and it's the number 4 mistake that anglers, or number 5 mistake that anglers make with swimbaits. So the number 5 mistake that anglers make when they're fishing swimbaits is that they ignore casting angle. They don't think about the proper casting angle to get fish to eat a swimbait. And this is incredibly important. And we saved it to the end of the stream because we didn't want to talk about it that much. I didn't want to talk about it that much, except for the guys who are in the end of the stream here. So if you made it all the way to the end here, you are a bass fishing nerd and you deserve this information. So I'm going to start out here, Randy, with the offshore approach and kind of explain what I'm talking about with the casting angle. So I'm going to pull up a couple different things here real quick. So we're going to pull up a point and we're going to pull up a couple other things. So here is a point that we were showing earlier. And what I want to talk about with casting angle with swim baits is that you always want to make sure that your bait is coming at the fish in the most natural way possible. And what I mean by this is in certain times of the year, the bass are going to be ambushing bait fish from deep water up to shallow water. And sometimes they're ambushing the bait fish from shallow water out to deep water. So it kind of depends on which direction they're actually feeding. And what you'll find is that when you're fishing in the wintertime, a lot of your bass are going to be sitting in shallower water, let's say 15 to 25 feet of water, and feeding out deeper. And what they're basically trying to do is they're waiting here up shallow, waiting for the shad to swim from deep water up into the shallower zone, and then pinning those bait fish against the shallower water. To kind of give you a graphic here, what you'll find is that your bait fish in the winter are going to be positioned deeper. And so those bass, they're going to be waiting up here for those bait fish to get close to the bottom, and then they're going to pin them against shallower water like this. So those bait are coming from deep into shallow, and those bass will pin them here. What this means is that in the wintertime, the most effective way to catch swimbait fish, in my opinion, is to actually throw your swimbait from shallow water out into deeper water and then work it back up the slope. You're basically working uphill. The reason for this is because as that swimbait starts coming uphill into the shallower water, the bass feel like they have a better chance of pinning that shad against the bottom of the lake, and they're much more likely to commit to eating that swimbait. So if they're swimming like this, and then that swimbait, they're following it, and then that swimbait gets closer to the bottom as it comes up the slope, I don't know the exact percent, but I would say 30, maybe 20, 30% more likely to actually commit to that bait. And I get so many more bites when I'm fishing swim baits in the wintertime. From now all the way up through right before the bass spawn, by positioning my boat, I'll sometimes put it literally on the point. Put my boat so that the trolling motor is in the rocks, and then I'm casting out into deeper water, into 30 or 40 feet, and bringing the swim bait uphill. And casting out into deep water and bringing it uphill. And I actually did a video on this last year, and actually I was out in the lake the same day Randy was, or one of the same times, and I caught 60 fish in 4.5 hours on Table Rock Lake by swimming that swim bait uphill. I started in the morning fishing it from deeper into shallower water, just trying to get a feel for what was going on. I got like 1 or 2 bites doing it, and I'm like, man, if I go, shallow to deep, I bet I'll catch a lot more fish. First point I pulled up on, I literally parked my boat in a flooded bush so it wouldn't move away. I didn't have spot lock at the time or anything, or no power pole. So I just like lodged my boat in a bush and started casting out all over this point where I saw some fish suspended on my graph, and I caught like 20 fish on 20 casts doing that. And those fish wouldn't commit when my bait was coming from shallow water out to deep water. I would feel them bump it, or they would just kind of follow it. And I could see them underneath my boat with my 2D sonar, but when I went from shallow out to deep, they crushed it. Now it's the complete opposite in the summertime. A lot of bass in the summertime are actually going to be sitting a little bit deeper, and they're waiting for bait fish to come over the top of points or over the top of ledges, and they're actually going to ambush them from deeper water. So when I'm catching a lot of fish in the swim bait in the summer, a lot of my bass are actually positioned off the drop. And if we kind of use an example like this here, we can get these trees out of here. But a lot of your bass are going to be positioned right on the lip of the drop or off the drop, and they're waiting for the shad to come over the top of the ledge, and then they're going to feed on those shad as they pop over the ledge. This means I'm going to be positioning my boat in deeper water, casting up into shallower water, and then reeling that bait over that ledge and then dropping it down. So if we take a look at the image, I'm positioning my boat here in the creek channel, casting up on top of the drops and reeling my swim bait over. And the key strike zone for the swim bait when you're fishing it in the summertime is right when that bottom starts to drop off. Right when that drop off happens, that's where those bass will be positioned. And if you can work your swim bait, maybe 4 or 5 feet off the bottom, and then right when you hit that break, if you can time it right, drop that swim bait, let it fall down right down that slope, you're going to get hammered every single time. So casting angle is super critical when you're offshore swim bait fishing. That's like one of my juiciest tips I can give you guys, and it is that's like, Randy, that no one wants to share that. I'm glad that I'm not fishing professionally or fishing any tournaments. This is the reason I don't fish tournaments, guys. Half the reason, because I give up all my good spots. I give up all my techniques. I don't hold anything back. I give you guys literally everything. So there's no point in me fishing tournaments anymore. I've given it all up. But yeah, that's at least my 2 cents there.
Yeah, and you've got me sharing my secrets too. Now I'm not supposed to do that. I still fish tournaments. But hey, I'll share my screen. I'll sort of show you the shallow end of it here.
For sure.
We got here. One quick thing, guys, before I explain this about the shallow water deal, is we didn't get a chance to talk about it. Let me talk just real quick about color on the swim baits. Just a real foundational, just a basic rule of thumb, because I know some people got questions on colors. Most swim baits that you have out there are some type of shad pattern, different type of hues, but basically, stay with your more translucence type colors in clear water. If you get into a little bit more of a stained milky, you can go to more of the pearls. One of the things I like to do on all my swim baits, I found that this really works good. Doesn't matter what color swim bait you're using, is take a chartreuse, spike it pin, or just a chartreuse marker pin, and put a little bitty chartreuse line all the way down the side of the swim bait, and then just a little bitty puff of chartreuse on the tail. I found that even in clear water, that gets me more strikes, a lot more strikes. Actually, Aaron Martins is the one that keyed me in on that years ago, and I've been doing it ever since Aaron showed me that. So anyway, back here on the point here, let's talk about casting angles on the shallow points. For me, the most important consideration, like we talked about again, is wind. And the reason that my casting angle, the number one consideration is the wind direction, is because of the way the bait looks in the water. Let's say, for example, the wind's coming in here like 15 miles an hour. If my boat was over here trying to make a 45-degree angle cast into the wind that's coming like this, my line's going to have a bow in it. And with the 1/8 ounce head, what that's going to do is that's going to make my swim bait sort of drift off to the side, and it's not going to look natural. So what I'm trying to do is I want to position my boat where I can cast directly with the wind anywhere that I'm at. I'm always setting the boat up thinking, directly into the wind. However I need to do, that's what I'm going to do. And I will fish around the whole point, but that's going to be my main focal point. Now, if there's, say if it's very light wind, or if there's no wind at all, if I roll into the point here, this is how I'm going to approach it. I'm going to start on the inside of the point, approximately 50 yards down before I get to the end of the point. You're going to have a sweet spot here on both ends of the point, because this is where your sharpest break's going to be. The sharpest break, for the most part, is going to be on the inside portion of any point. And this little sweet spot right before it flattens out on the end, this is where your big fish are going to set up a lot of times. So my cast on this particular thing, it's going to be on a light wind or no wind. It's going to be at a 45-degree angle in towards the bank, bringing it down off this sharper drop. Then I'm going to work in here. I'm going to make a series of parallel casts across the end, anywhere between 5 to maybe 20 foot of water. Then I get my boat straight out here and I make a barrage of casts straight into the point. And then I repeat on the same side over here, 45-degree angles into the drop sweep spot, and then work down the bank. Now, a lot of the casting angles when you're fishing a swim bait shallow has to do with how the point drops off. You know, some of these points will be very quick drop off. Some of them are long, almost shoals that run way out into the lake. So you're going to have to let the angle of the point and the composition of the point really dictate how your boat positioning set up. But for the most part, the biggest thing I want to reiterate as far as casting angles on swim baits in shallow water in the wintertime is do everything you can to cast with the wind and to keep that bait in a perfectly straight line where it's not drifting off to one side. Because what happens then, as that bait's drifting off to one side, if you cast at a 45-degree angle, your head of the bait is also going to be drifting off. So the bait is not going to look as natural, and it's all about a visual strike on a swim bait. The swim bait telegraphs very little vibration. It telegraphs very little thing that gives it away other than its sight. So that's why it's so important to rig it straight and to get it looking good and to tweak those little colors on it and just keep it as lifelike as you can.
Good stuff there, Randy. If you could stop sharing your screen there. So it's kind of interesting there too, because you're casting into where my boat is positioned most of the time when I'm fishing points and stuff on Table Rock. And one thing I will say on that, a lot of times that putting my boat shallow casting deep will work, but a lot of times, I'm finding fish with my electronics first before I ever do that. I'm going to find the fish on the points with my electronics. So I'm not just going to pull up on a random point, put my boat on the bank, and start casting. So you'll find this time of year on Table Rock, a lot of those fish are really deep, so that might not be a great technique. But as you get in more in that March and April time, it becomes really good. So stuff we're talking about too, guys, just take it in context that there's a lot more factors that we can go into, and I try to go into those in my the Fish the Moment YouTube channel. So if you're watching this first time stumbling on this live stream, this is actually our live stream channel. We actually have a Fish the Moment YouTube channel, the main channel. Now I'm coming out with a video this Thursday, Randy, about brush pile fishing in the winter. I catch a 7-pounder, a 6-pounder, a 5-pounder. I give away all the juice with brush pile fishing. I was making the video and I'm like, man, this video I'm giving away too much again. That's how I always feel every single one of these videos. That's what I felt about the live scope video too. I'm like, dang, I'm giving away too much. But that's what I like to do. I want to make sure it's comprehensive for you guys. So check out the Fish the Moment YouTube channel, the main channel. And also, if you guys are really liking the content, if you like the live stream, and there's 228 of you guys on here right now. So if you like this live stream, easiest ways to actually support the channel and support more live stream content is just to go to fishthemoment.com, head to the support Fish the Moment page, and you can join our Patreon page to basically support the channel with a small monthly donation, or just use our Tackle Warehouse link. This is the easiest way you guys can support us. Just literally click on this link on fishthemoment.com, bookmark the link, and if you bookmark it, you can basically just have this page show up every single time you use Tackle Warehouse, and all you have to do is just check out on Tackle Warehouse, and we get a small percentage of your profits. It's super helpful to us, easiest way to support us. Obviously, you can sign up for virtual seminars we talked about earlier, things like that, but just a really simple way to do it is just to use that Tackle Warehouse link, nothing else you need to do. Now, another thing I want to call out is that going forward, Randy actually had a great idea that we're going to be putting some polls up on our Instagram page, Facebook page, our Facebook community, also on YouTube, asking questions of you guys, and we're actually going to answer 5 subscribers' questions on the next live stream. So all you have to do is literally just go on to our social media pages, like and follow them so you get notified on that, and we're going to be answering people's questions on the live stream. We'll spend about 10 to 15 minutes answering specific questions. We'll pick the questions that we can really dig into and spend some time talking about, and so definitely go on to our social media pages, like it. It's just at Fish in the Moment on Instagram and Facebook, and we also have the Fish in the Moment community page. Join there. You can put your questions in, and every week we're going to be going through those questions. So that's a great way to support us. And also, if you're still here, 203 people here, go down and leave a like on this YouTube video. It helps us out a ton. A like on the live stream always helps. And also just subscribe to the Fish Moment Live channel. We just started it 2 weeks ago. We only have 1,000 subscribers. We have 85,000 on the main channel. So if we can even get this channel up to 10 or 15,000 subscribers, it would really, really help us out. So share the stream with friends if you don't mind sharing the information. I don't know if I would share it, Randy. If I was a tournament guy, I want to keep it tight-lipped. But if you're a generous soul, want to help us out, definitely share out the stream. If you're going to keep this information to yourself, go to fishthemoment.com, go to the support Fish the Moment page, and use our Tackle Warehouse link. If you're keeping this information to yourself, you might as well help us out with this. That way we get some benefit out of it if you're keeping it all to yourself. So hopefully that all works out. And Randy, that's pretty much all we have for tonight. Anything else you want to talk about before we close up on swim baits?
Yeah, just like I said, one thing pertinent to where we're at now, guys, swim baits, they're one of the best. The finesse swim baits are one of the best winter baits you can throw. I don't care if you're fishing 5 feet deep or 50 feet deep. Just incorporate them into your arsenal. If you're fishing jerk baits, jigs, crankbaits, whatever, there's always going to be a time and place for a swim bait, particularly on those days where there's not much wind, where it's sunny, where it's post-frontal conditions, where the fish are just really hard to catch. A little 3-inch swim bait on 6-pound test line is going to get you a lot of bites this time of year.
For sure. It's definitely a bait to test out. It's not an easy bait to fish, guys, but I'll be throwing a lot of swim baits in upcoming videos, so I'll be giving you guys a lot of help there. If you guys want to learn how to fish a crankbait, a swim bait, and a jig, go subscribe to Fish the Moment YouTube channel. That's all I talk about. Randy has his YouTube channel too. Intuitive Angling with Randy Blockett, where we talked about all kinds of stuff. You talk about why you should smell your fish today. I don't know what that video is about. I haven't watched it yet. I don't want you to spoil it for me. If you want to know why you should smell your fish, go check out Randy Blockett's channel, Intuitive Angling with Randy Blockett. And otherwise, guys, thanks for checking out the stream. If you do want to actually watch these live stream clips again, we're actually posting clips every single day to the Fish the Moment live YouTube channel. We're just cutting up the stream into like 10, 15-minute segments. So if you want to rewatch my tip on fishing the swim bait uphill or whatever I talked about, just check back on the page every single day. There's going to be short clips of, kind of the highlights of the stream that you can check out, and so watch those as well. So anyways, guys, thanks for checking out the stream tonight. Glad everyone is able to join over from Fish the Moment main channel and come over here. It seems like we're at least getting a lot of you guys to come over, and hopefully you guys are enjoying the content. Again, check out our social media pages. We're going to be leaving questions for upcoming live stream, and we'll answer 5 of your questions on the next stream. So thanks again for checking out the live stream, guys, and we'll see y'all next week on Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Have a good night.